Yes, I'm all set and ready. This is, I believe, is Gordon's third time that he's been on. Gordon runs the retrieval group of dead spirits that get stuck, and I'm the coordinator of that. We meet twice a month, the first and the third. So come join us. Last time that we had it, we had 9 people there, and 7 of us did retrievals. And if you don't know anything about it, just come. You can learn. We'll just teach you. And now Gordon has a different subject today. And as you've heard, if you've been here listening, Gordon's been doing this for a long time. Our little group's been going about a year, and it's really gone fast. And he's taught us all kinds of stuff. So Gordon's from Toronto, Canada. And as a matter of fact, just a little side note, him and I met finally after a year. I live in Buffalo. He lives in Toronto. We went halfway last week, and we had a 2-hour lunch together. So it was really nice. So, Gordon, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
Great to be here, everybody. I'm very happy to be delivering today. And I sense the energy is high and good and positive. Lots of chuckling and laughter. That's always a good thing when we're dealing with these esoteric topics. It's always good to keep at least one foot on the ground and laugh, because our distance from spirit on the physical plane can give us all kinds of issues and problems and challenges that take us away from lightheartedness and laughter. So it's always good to indulge in that a little bit, I think. So here I'm going to go into the higher self and do a quick survey of how I discovered the higher self and how I have experience with it. And I will be quoting other researchers and experiencers of the past and how it led me into it. And I'm sure quite a lot of you know about this being called the higher self, or the monad, or the group soul, or the source self. All of these terms have been given to it over the years. And in my early days of studying this stuff and feeling myself to be a little bit psychic with a few lucid dreams about my deceased father, I was fortunate to live in the suburbs of a great city like Toronto, where if you could get downtown, there were more used bookstores than you could shake a stick at. And you could discover almost anything that you were thinking you might like. And I'm talking about theosophy, spiritualism, Seth, various kinds of esoteric teachings, Rosicrucianism, all sorts of things. And so I had a very quick education at that point because of that access, that I realized people in smaller towns and rural areas before the internet wouldn't have had. So, I felt kind of blessed in that way. So a good deal, not all of it, but some of what I'm going to read out to you today are from books that I discovered many, many years ago. And the first one, well, one knows about Frederick Myers, and when he passed on, he channeled through Geraldine Cummings. And in 1932, as far as I can gather from the research I've done, he shocked the world of spiritualism by talking openly about reincarnation and the group soul, which was not considered, the right thing to be talking about in that society. The Theosophists talked about it, but spiritualists seem to be caught up in an argument over it, according to the old stuff that I've read. So I just want to give you a little glimpse of what he had to say about the group soul in 1932. The group soul is one and yet many. The informing spirit makes these souls one. I think I have explained to you before that as there are certain centers in the brain, so in psychic life there are a number of souls all bound together by one spirit, depending for their nourishment on that spirit. When I was on earth, I belonged to a group soul, but its branches and the spirit, which might be compared to the roots, were in the invisible. Now, if you would understand psychic evolution, this group soul must be studied and understood. For instance, it explains many of the difficulties that people will assure you can be removed only by the doctrine of reincarnation. You may think my statement frivolous, but the fact that we do appear on earth to be paying for the sins of another life is, in a certain sense, true. It was our life, and yet not our life. In other words, a soul belonging to the group of which I am a part lived that previous life, which built up for me the framework of my earthly life, lived it before I had passed through the gates of birth. In this invisible world, there is an infinite variety of conditions, and I can only speak of what I know. I do not claim to be infallible. Take the following examples as axioms. Anyway, that's a little segment of what turned the spiritualist world upside down in 1932. And you can read references to it all over if you figure on doing a deep dive, and which is not necessary because there's a lot more recent stuff. And the Theosophists, for example, were onto it much earlier than that. And I'm going to read you a little bit from that and just show you what they had to say. That's if I can find it. Here we go. This is in a chapter from my book, You Are History, and it's called The Monad as Offered by Others. So I think this was Helena Blavatsky in the 1870s, 1880s. The monad is a dropout of the shoreless ocean beyond, or, to be correct, within the plane of primeval differentiation. It is divine in its higher and human in its lower condition. The adjectives higher and lower being used for lack of better words. And the monad remains at all times, save in the nirvana state, under whatever conditions or whatever external forms. It exists and it remains at all times. As the Logos reflects the universe in the divine mind, and the manifest universe reflects itself in each of its monads, as Leibniz put it when repeating the teaching, so too the monad has, during the cycle of its incarnation, the ability to reflect itself in every root form of each kingdom. Therefore, the Kabbalists say correctly that, quote, man becomes a stone, a plant, an animal, a man, a spirit, and finally God. Thus accomplishing his cycle or circuit and returning to the point from which he had started as a heavenly man. But by man, the divine monad is meant and not the thinking entity, much less his physical body. So that's pretty intense, but I think it's important to see that the founder of the Theosophical movement, Madame Blavatsky, had that to say in her incredibly impenetrable book, The Secret Doctrine. But you can find sections of The Secret Doctrine that are actually understandable, although it takes a lot of patience. So a little bit more from her follower, Charles Ledbetter, from a book called The Monad and Other Essays, which is eminently more easy to understand than the Secret Doctrine and is available online easily. So we used such expressions as looking up to the higher self, listening to the promptings of the higher self, and so on. I remember that Mr. Sinnott used to sometimes speak a little disparagingly of the higher self, remarking that it ought to take more interest than it seemed to do in the unfortunate personality struggling on its behalf down here. And he used to jokingly suggest the formation of a society for the education of our higher selves. It was only gradually that we grew into the feeling that the higher self was the man, and that what we see down here is only a very small part of him. Only little by little did we learn that there is only one consciousness, and that the lower, through an imperfect representation of the higher, is in no way separate from it. we used to think of raising ourselves till we could unite ourselves with that glorified higher being, not realizing that it was the higher that was the true self, and that to unite the higher to the lower really meant opening out the lower so that the higher might work in it and through it. Now, I read that because channeled about written, sorry, not channeled, about 1910, I think. But it leads us right into what I would say most practitioners and experiencers understand in our contemporary times. That in order to merge with the higher self, you have to raise up your lower self through meditation or any number of practices, yoga, anything you like. As far as I'm concerned, all these practices are good if you focus on them and are, one-pointed about it. And when I discovered that, it was of interest to me that Ledbetter had put his finger on it, like how many, 110 years ago. So, and if you want to dive deeply into Rosicrucianism or Masonic teachings or Hermetic teachings or Kabbalistic teachings, you will find much the same thing expressed in different languages. We've had people talk about the Kabbalah and other situations. So you will find it, although obviously that's a deep dive, and I'm kind of whizzing across the surface today. So that is an important point, and I'll let you think about that for just a minute while I find the next stretch of what I'd like to do on this. It leads into this perennial issue that I find people still talking about on Facebook groups and whatnot. Well, that's the wrong one. About the difference between how the higher self thing sees things and how we see it as an individual. And there does seem to be a distinct difference, and that you can I feel, only resolve through meditation, or maybe glimpses. But here's one paragraph from my second book, More Adventures in Eternity, from 2007, where I finally felt that I could understand this distinction between higher self and the incarnate individual. In a sentence, higher self sees things one way, while the incarnate personality sees things another way. Will there be a blending of perspectives? I sure hope so. Physical Gordon has been chiseling out his response for years. The progress report looks like this. As the incarnate personality continues to expand, its perceptions overflow their original dimension. What was once defined by space, a body, becomes defined by time, many bodies. What was once defined by physical plane reality, inevitable extinction, becomes redefined by astral plane reality, apparent immortality, and then further refined by higher self contact, eternity experienced in a huge variety of self-engineered limitations. As a result, the one-track mind becomes the multi-dimensional being. So that's it in a nutshell. And I've struggled with this for many years. I'm not struggling anymore, but that's back from 2007, 2008. And eventually I realized, as I've taught many people, the way to overcome it, and I know people struggle with this a lot when they do a bit of past life regression, or they do some, before birth regression, and think, why did I choose such an incredibly difficult life? The glimpses of higher self, or they read about it in other people's books like mine or many other researchers and experiencers, and think, well, God, why does higher self have such a great time and we have such a struggle? And I would say it's just the way it is. We accept our position in this physical plane for the challenges and experiences that it gives us, and accept the sort of education that we will get, however far along we pursue it. And certainly when I deal with, as I do with clients that are having deep difficulty with the apparent tragedies of their life, and they will often say to me or on Facebook groups, I see this quite regularly, well, I'm not coming back. I've had enough this time. And I say to them, well, yeah, fine. There's no, I don't think in my mind, in my experience, there's no angel or guide that will twist your arm and say, you gotta go back. Nobody does that. And they might encourage you to come back to complete your education. But if you want to spend 100 years in the astral plane having a whale of a time and then come back, well, you can do it. So, and again, if you don't wish to, I should explain how one goes to the higher self when you're in the astral plane. You go from either, as we know, some people are in the lower astral having a heck of a time because of their narrow attitudes and their resentments and angers, or they're in a sort of a mid-level plane that's quite nice but not that great, or then a paradise plane like the Summerland or higher. And in those levels, they are actually who they are now. Like if it was me, Gordon would be Gordon, an expanded Gordon. And if it was you, David or Sherry or Wendy, it would be the expanded Sherry or Wendy, just like we're seeing with Karen. But in order to, in my experience, to go to the formless levels where the higher selves and the monads dwell and rejoin that group soul, even for just a short period, you have to raise yourself up to that level. And part of that raising up is giving up your perception of your incarnate personality. And I'm sure quite a few of you have meditated on this and thought on this. And right now I'm thinking of Gary Langley. I think he's thought about it. And he well knows that in order to go to that level, he's going to have to give up being Gary for a while with all his attachments and nationalities and pets and stuff, just like I would. But you can go to that level temporarily and become this entity without an identity and join your higher self and be the consciousness of higher self for a while, because higher self doesn't really have a personality consciousness. It's a being beyond the angelic state. It's a being without limit or definition, I feel, kind of like a golden globe, if you want. And so I just give that as a message for all you to ponder on. This can be done either in meditation here on, on your regular meditation period, however you do it, or when you're asleep at night, or when if you care to project using a hemisync tape or whatever, you can do all this. And you may think, well, that's okay for Gordon, he can do it, but I don't think I can. So yes, that's fine. That's another self-imposed limitation. And I've had lots of them myself on my way up the ladder, the Jacob's ladder of consciousness. And I've joked about it in many of my books. And, even in the last year or so, I've experienced, limitations falling away where I thought, oh man, I didn't know I could do that. So it's an onward journey. So as you think about the higher self and think over the things I'm reading and saying, try not to feel that it's beyond your abilities or beyond what you feel you can accomplish in this life. You can do it. And it may be a little scary because giving up your attachments to your personality and your emotions and your whatever, I've got all the same stuff that everyone else does. I've got regrets and resentments. I keep them under control, but they're there. And I have to give them up in order to move up to that level and be this non-judgmental, loving being. And it's let me give you an example. I think higher self looks at us in non-judgmentally and loving the way that we as parents, even though I haven't been a parent, look at a helpless little baby that we're just so in love with, we just can't help ourselves. We're all over them, and onto them in a loving way 24 hours a day. And our higher self doesn't have that 24 hours a day thing. It has more of a sort of a switch that it can turn on and look at its various personality projections on Earth, either in past times or this time or future times. And it sort of checks you out for a little while and says, oh, that's how he's doing, or that's how she's doing. Interesting. I'll watch for that in the future, or maybe next time I'll give them more courage and less timidity, or less pride and more vanity, or whatever. They adjust the menu between lives. So that's one analogy that strikes me once in a while, especially in the summertime here in Canada, where I see ladies with babies holding them to their chests as they sip on their morning coffee and chatter. I think of that very, very often. Even this morning, I thought of that. So, how am I doing for time? Am I over yet? What do you think? David, you're muted. What did you say?
Okay, you have about 5 minutes. That'll make it a half an hour. You can go longer if you want, or we can ask questions whenever you want.
Right, right. I think I've got one. I mean, there's a lot, as I said to everybody, there's lots to go into in this. And if you're intrigued and not overwhelmed, I'm happy to do part two some weeks from now, because there's lots more to talk about. This is just an introduction. So the last thing I'm going to do is a little meditation thing that I wrote for my book of essays called Confronting Your Immortality about 10 years ago or something. This little segment's called How Higher Self Sees You. That's the you that's reading this. That's the you living your life enmeshed in your identity, family, and society. The you that copes and struggles and plays. The you that was born and will die. The you that made plans before arrival and will continue as a spirit in the after of this life. That you is an aspect of higher self, total self, source self, monad, projected from one of the energy matrices on the monadic plane. The ones who arrived here from elsewhere when invited at the ancient onset of Earth development for discrete sentient forms, many millions of years in the ago of linear time. That ago is more or less irrelevant to us as spirits in the spirit realms, where history is swallowed by the reality of non-aging eternity. But it is admittedly impressive to us here, seemingly trapped in the lockstep of growth and progress. As a projected aspect of higher self, you are, it would seem, to be a miniaturized model of the complete being, a holographic representation. You share its divine wisdom that is there, but rarely immediately apparent, as it is overlaid, veiled, and blocked by the knowledge necessary for the successful navigation of the physical plane, which in its early days was so fraught with pitfalls, predators, and dangers that any kind of survival, however brief, was considered a triumph. This blocking of divine source was intentional, an experiment by the planetary designers to create maximum darkness and distance from omniscience, just to see how humans might cope and learn. As monads thus invited from elsewhere, like Sirius, Andromeda, etc., we were intrigued and wished to challenge ourselves. Well, of course, the little part of ourselves which arrived on the surface as primitive humans soon, if not immediately, forgot all that. We became controlled by fear and convinced by separation. We were the kids that divinity forgot, God's pathetic orphans. Belief systems were built from such foundations and became myths, religions, philosophies, and political economies. Now, when higher self sees us, it sees divine beings lost in belief systems. Systems like democracy, progress, agriculture, manufacturing, worship of prophets and gods. It sees children playing, children frightened and ignorant, children educated and desirous, children mystified and lost in enchantments. It knows the distance between its vibratory level and that of incarnation is so great that the production and avid consumption of sustaining belief systems is inevitable and cannot in this planetary system be avoided. It allows for the entanglements thus produced. It waits patiently as we travel through ignorance and indulgence, poverty and wealth, allegiances to family, tribe, nation, religion, the pampering of vanity and pride, the walls of fear and isolation, moral turpitude and fervor, accumulation and disbursement of treasures, devotion to ideals and profits. indulgence in emotions, subjection to the intellect, service to self or humanity, attachments to hells, paradises, and heavens. It waits patiently because it knows our return, despite the entrapment of epochs and cultures, is inevitable, that we shall remerge with the light, becoming once again a knowing wave in the ocean, completely at ease with the pull and push of tides, and utterly uncaring of destiny, achievement, meaning, and immortality. Well, there you go. That's as much as I think I should be saying this time. And thank you for being so patient and listening.
Oh, very nice, Gordon. I think I'll take the first question. And that last thing that you read, did you
Yeah.
say that our first incarnation was from a different planet or different planets?
I believe through my own researches and others, people who have read, that all of us arrived from fairly fully formed from a variety of places. Like, the planets you've heard the ETs mention, the planets you've heard are the planetary systems that other people will say, well, I'm sure I'm from Andromeda, or I'm sure I'm Sirian, or whatever. I think the devas and angels that set up this planet, and I wrote about that in my memoir. The landscape, planetary angels and devas, when they finished their job, which one can go into in detail, but I'm not going to. We got invited. The invite went out, and we came in space. And it's an invite. It's not a demand. And we need some souls. And some of us came as mature souls to act as guides and figures that would be perceived as angels and prophets by the more primitive younger souls that were on the earth as cavemen or whatever, and busily farming their religions in this dire straits of terrible weather and animals that eat you every 5 minutes. So I do believe that, David, and obviously one cannot prove it, but in the last 20 years or so, with the arrival of all these YouTube videos where people talk about this stuff openly and regularly, it's become, I wouldn't say commonplace, but it's certainly more talked about than when I first discovered it through books, 30 and 35 years ago.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, second question. In one of your other readings, did I hear you say this correctly, that our higher self contains a group of souls? And if so, what do you mean by that?
The higher self is a group soul. Myers saw that. Other people have saw it. There are more quotes I could have given, but I didn't want to swamp people with too many quotes from earlier researchers. I mean, Jane Roberts has got a really good one that's only about 5 lines long. She's wonderful. She calls it the source self, and of which other selves are projections. So it's a group soul, and some contemporary researchers and experiencers will tell you that there are anything from 20 to 500 souls in a monad. Now, how they back that up, I don't know. But when I did my book, the UR history, and I tried to consider the relationship of the higher self with a bunch of incarnations that I could remember, I came up with about 22, 23 incarnations. Now, I knew there were others, but I was focusing on the ones I felt that were like, as some regressionists say, turning points. Because there's a number of lives where we just have very quiet peasant type lives where we try to have a family and support them and not die too young, and family, the love of family and supporting ourselves is all that we really do. And we have a lot of those. They're not really turning points, but they cement our relationship with other souls that we know. And but there's others where you get involved in major historic events, wars, politics, religions, where you start to play a bit of a more elevated game and either benefit from it or suffer from it. So does that help any, David?
Yeah. So this group of souls that you talk about, have they had, is it have some of them or all of them had different lives and they're just part of this group?
I believe so. I believe so. Again, it's a subject you'll find various people discussing. Even on that interview show, New Thinking Aloud, I notice he has guests that discuss that a little bit, and other sources. So it's great that people discuss this stuff because 30 and 40 years ago, I'd read a book of theosophy or stuff, or some spiritualism where they'd be arguing about it, and you think, well, is this ever going to get resolved? And I wouldn't say it's resolved now, but it's really much more out in the open, and you can really indulge yourself in other people's points of view on this if that's what you feel like doing.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, Gordon, are you familiar with Michael Newton's work?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
yes,
well,
I'm very familiar.
Okay, well, he in his research in his field of hypnotherapy,
Yeah,
apparently almost universally, his clients who report their afterlife experience do report the stage of becoming integrated with and communicating with their soul group, in his terms.
Yes, I'm aware of that. And I read, his books were well distributed when they first came out, so I grabbed them. And I would one thing I like to say on that is that because he formed some sort of course or group which other practitioners have studied, his views, which are in the main rather educative and good, are spread out to other regressionists. And they adopt his attitudes and what I consider his assumptions that are unproven. And this has come up for discussion a number of times. For example, Dan, in his books, when he talks about people's experiences as his clients going through their afterlife experience, there is very, very little about what the afterlife is actually like. He completely misses it and talks about contact with guides and educative stuff and things that people are doing, and completely ignores the thousands and thousands of souls that aren't doing that sort of thing. They're following Christianity, they're following spiritualism, they're following any number of religions, and they get to the paradise worlds and they live out what they expect from their religious education, which they are very, very attached to. And I'm talking Muslims, I'm talking Hindus, I'm talking the whole 9 yards. And why is that not in any of his books?
Could it be? Sorry, Gordon. No, I was wondering, could it be because those kinds of people who are prone to consult with a hypnotherapist in the first place, may be less likely to be practitioners of those religions in that way?
Yes, I see what you're saying.
A sampling error.
Yeah, but because, for example, a regressionist from Australia called Karen Joy, whose book on choosing dark lives I found very influential, and I quoted it in an essay that I wrote just recently. She's very good at why people go the wrong turn and become warriors and murderers and terrible people for any number of lives before they drag themselves out of it. When I say any number of lives, we're talking hundreds of years. But the downfall of her book, and it's only a small downfall, is that she kind of copies some of Newton's attitudes. And again, I cannot abide people that talk about reincarnation and what we learn without, we talk endlessly about the struggles we have on the physical plane, but let's also talk about the joys that we have in paradise, because it's part of the whole picture. And to sort of slide that sideways because, well, we've got more important things to do, that just doesn't strike me as significant or useful.
Gordon, have you read or come across a book called Postmortem Journal?
Oh, yes, absolutely. One of my favorites, Dan.
It is one of my favorites as well. And I reread this book about once a year. And I keep finding new things in it that I had forgotten or set aside or didn't want to see at first.
Yes.
But I absolutely recommend this as a must read for anyone interested in perspectives on the afterlife. This book was channeled by the British medium Jane Sherwood, over a
Yes.
period of years from T.E. Lawrence, who was well known as Lawrence of Arabia.
Of
And
course.
he lived an adventuresome and in some ways not particularly exemplary life.
Yes.
And a lot of this book is his process of bringing to consciousness and dealing with his own ego, his own behavior, his own
Yes.
transgressions, and
Mhm.
his struggle over time to, under the guidance of a man who was essentially a therapist on the other side and
Yes.
guide, to grow through the challenges of that life and end up in a very, very different place eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
I'm going to
so
put a link to that book in the chat for anyone who's interested.
Yes, yes. And yeah, absolutely. Jane Sherwood is very good. I liked her other book, The Country Beyond, I think.
Yes, yes.
And I mean, she's an exemplar of what's so wonderful about the best quality of spiritualism to me. I may have sounded earlier in my talk that I was promoting theosophy over spiritualism. I wasn't. It's two sides of the argument, especially in the 1920s and 30s when they seemed to be at loggerheads with each other. They don't seem that way now, which is wonderful. Obviously, spiritualism gives emotional solace to the suffering, and no question about that. It did that to me many years ago. But whereas theosophy makes you think about stuff, difficult stuff, challenging stuff. But when you balance them out, as we're experiencing with the way people discuss this stuff on websites and YouTube videos, I find a great harmony coming into being.
You all done there, Dan? Or we lose you?
Yeah, no, thanks.
Okay.
No, I'm fine, Dave.
Yeah, okay. Okay, there's got to be some other comments out there. This has been a subject that's been talked about many, many times. For me, it's been confusing. And who else has got some comments on the higher self? Hyacinth, unmute, please.
No, this is not on the higher self, but it was about the group souls. It was I was told more than 30 years ago, was that we come down in groups.
Yes.
And we evolve.
Yes.
And to move on, again, we move on in groups. And so that's why you wait for the ones who are slow to catch up.
Yes,
so that you can move on, because you need that to move on. And you understand that?
Well, I've seen that point of view expressed many times by different souls, and either incarnate souls, I'm pretty sure Bob Monroe and Bruce Moen talked about that. They talked about the laggers, the slowpokes in the group souls, and I'm sure Monroe talked about that. And so the question that raises for me, Hyacinth, is if you're part of a group soul and you've transcended your physical existence and you feel like you're ready to move on to another level within the monad, and you feel like you're held back by half a dozen people that belong to the group that are slowpokes and really acting as anchors on a ship that wants to sail. That would seem to me to be quite a real experience. But at the same time, when you're in the spirit worlds, whatever level you're in, and the higher self is in a pretty high level, I wonder about the perception of when you're looking at these slowpoke souls. How are you seeing them? They're in time, but you're not. So I do wonder about that apparent contradiction. And I'm not telling you that I've got it resolved, but I do wonder about it.
I got another. Go ahead.
No, well, could you state the essence of that contradiction again, Gordon?
Okay, as I recall it's not something I ponder about that particular issue I've come across, but I don't trouble myself over it. But as we talk about for example, my wife's rereading Bob Monroe and Bruce Moen books and discussing them with me regularly. So I go, oh yeah, I remember when he talked about that. So I know there's a section where Bob Monroe talks about his disc and joining it and being part of it, and his experience of being part of the disc and how blissful and joyful that vibrational level is. But there's some stuff about uh, members of that group soul that aren't making as much progress as the rest of them would like. Now, whether they're caught up in civil wars or hatred or anger or just self-destructive violence or whatever, there seems to be this perception that it's holding the monad back. And then there's another part where he talks about seeing a graduating monad and how glorious it is. He may not use that exact language, but it's in there somewhere. And so when I read that, I feel I understand what he's saying, but when it would seem to me that when I'm through my own projection activities or meditations, feel myself to be part of the higher self, and I've written about it and talked about it on my videos. I can interact in a sort of a verbal way with some of the earlier personalities in history, people that were from 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and there is a representation of them, a holographic representation of them within the higher self, with whom you can talk and interact. And they know all about you because you visited before when you were asleep. And you show up all kind of bright and shiny eyed and go, oh, it's great to talk to you. Finally, I projected myself here. And they go, well, you've been here before, don't you remember? So there's that whole thing. So when I'm in that state, Dan, I wonder, I mean, I don't sort of go, well, who are the slowpokes that are holding us back? I never even think to ask that question, although Monroe did. So maybe I'm a little at fault for not having explored that. But theoretically, it would seem to me within that level, that blissful level, I don't see how, a soul that's caught in an 18th century war really matters that very much. Is it really going to hold you down that much? Now, maybe it does, but it's not a question I'm satisfied that I've answered yet. So I hope that helps.
Well, I think the important thing is that we're asking the question.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, we all know that when we're in the spirit world and when we transcend, Karen sure is happy. I can bet your bottom dollar we're all going to be that happy as she is. So it's not going to be something we worry about over much. I mean, sure, we'll think about it. We're questing souls. We're on an adventure. We'll think about it. But believe me, you're going to have lots of fun. And because that's what I see when I'm there, people having fun, lots of it. And sports, family life, mucking around with dogs and cats and flying like birds. Everybody's having fun. It's bizarre. I mean, it's so fun. You can't hardly believe it. The carnival that never ends. Anyway, I've said enough.
Regina.
Yeah, I agree, Gordon. The carnival that never ends.
Yeah.
And the only time we thinking about somebody else in our soul group that's acting slow is because it's our own brain interfering and causing judgment, which is the whole human program. If we were really involved with our higher self or meditative self, as you say, we would recognize that the slower soul, which is also part of us, is slow for a purpose.
Yes.
And we don't know all the purposes, but once we get to reflect back and say, oh, I get it now. It's very interesting. And we lose all this time of slow is part of time, going fast or letting go, or it's a passage of or an accelerant. It's all part of our time frame. There is nothing is there on the other. Once we let it go, we realize we're all in the place where we need to be, because that's why we're here.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you. That was an awesome presentation. Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks. Well, I'm glad it didn't overwhelm you. I realize there's a ton of material there, and I really, believe it or not, I disciplined myself.
Gordon, if someone's having a past life regression
Yes.
and the hypnotist or hypnotherapist is telling them about a life that they lived before, is it possible that it's not really their life, it's someone in their soul group that they're hearing about?
Yes, that issue has come up a number of times in books and interviews and whatnot, and it has been coming up for many years. I mean, I've been reading past life regression books since, well, way before Michael Newton, and so it's a subject that comes up over and over, and one of the answers is only one, that you and another person in your soul group actually shared an incarnation of a historically identifiable figure. This came up for me once and it totally shocked me. I'm not going to go into the details, but I felt myself as a historical personality identifiable, and it's in the book, Your History. But later, I discovered a book by another experiencer, not well known, and doesn't seem to be online, who felt himself in a fairly detailed way to be this same historical personality. And we're not talking Cleopatra here, okay? Historically identifiable, but not crazily famous. So I had to confront that and thought, well, is it possible? This fellow does not seem to be online. I discovered it 20 years ago. I haven't contacted him. But I did give it a lot of thought, and it kind of shocked me at the time. So one sees it as a definite possibility, one way or the other, because the way higher self shoots out sparks from its divine fire and turns them into incarnate personalities as they come down through the planes and winding up in their mother's womb and being born. He's rather, I say he, higher self is rather like a master chef mixing different ingredients for every meal. Oh, I'll try a little bit of this. I'll try a pinch of that. Oh, he was too aggressive and violent the last time, and I was trying to get him to not be so timid, and I went overboard. And there's all that. That may sound funny, but it's true. Higher self is like that. It designs stuff, and it could easily design things whereby two of the members of its group are blended into one with sort of, well, hey, do you guys want to do this? Do you want to try it out? That sort of a thing. And so I don't know if that helps, David.
Yes,
but that
it does
my
help.
answer. Yeah.
Okay. Larice, you go ahead.
Okay. There's somebody named Frank DeMarco.
Yeah, that's right. He edited my first book.
Yeah, okay. So you know about him. And he talks about us experiencing our lives here on Earth as being various strands of the higher, and that would explain why several people might have memories of a similar person, like someone that everyone knew in history, because you might have been one or two or three strands of that, and somebody else might have been some more strands of that person, and then you guys went off in different directions, but everybody that was involved in that would have that memory.
Yes, I hear you, definitely. And when Frank started, he's done a whole pile of books at this point, but when he first started publishing his communications online from his, guides and stuff, he talked a lot about that very metaphor that you're talking about. And I didn't understand it at first. And this is ages ago. And I sort of debated it a little bit with him, and he got a little frustrated with me, thinking I was being, kind of daft. But anyway, I get it. I get it now.
Lloyd, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
No, it's been covered by other people since I raised my hand.
Okay.
So yeah,
Well,
I just add same thing to the conversation.
Well, Lloyd, I got to tell you, when I see your face on a couple of other GGs, I had a question in my mind, and I was waiting for my turn, and you came out with the exact same question. It was really something. I thought, oh, he's done it for me. Thanks. I can't remember what the question was, but when I look at your face, I go, oh, that was the guy that answered the question. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
But I do find that in groups, even when you're in a public forum with a speaker, and it doesn't have to be a spiritual speaker on any number of topics. And if I sit, and I'm kind of enthusiastic, as you know, I'll think of things to say. And then if I'm patient with myself, half the time somebody else asks the same question. So it's wonderful to pull back and see what the intelligence is in a group, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Sherry, unmute yourself and go on in.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Very interesting. I guess you must have read Jane's books on the education of Oversoul 7.
Oh, absolutely. All that, the Seth books come out in the early 70s. They were easily available in regular bookstores. Somebody said to me, Gord, you got to read this, put that down and read this. So you read Seth, and then you see the Jane Roberts, and then you see the funny little novels, Education Oversoul 7. Yeah, she got it right first time out. I praise her endlessly.
Me too. But what was so interesting was that 7 was in charge of a number of personalities on the earth. And
yes.
It was understood that the personalities were also interconnected unconsciously. They weren't necessarily aware of it. And in this book, The Further Education, the 7 is told that he has to, come into flesh in order to help a particular one of his souls that was in trouble. And his attitude was, oh no, respiration, circulation, digestion. I don't want to get involved with any of that again. It's very interesting, the whole perspective of this being an oversoul who's connected to certain beings in flesh and tries to influence them and help them as they go along their way. Just fascinating.
Indeed. And thank you for bringing that up. And I would certainly say to anybody that may find the Seth books a little bit overwhelming and intense. The Jane Roberts books are much easier accessible, and the little trilogy of novels about the education of Oversoul 7 is just a beautiful breeze. She manages to package the essence of esoteric teachings into a cute and funny little story, and she does it really well.
Yeah, she was a very talented writer and psychic. Very gifted.
Oh, indeed.